He took my masterpiece, polished it, and called it his own. But a stolen idea is just a blueprint, and I own the foundation. It all started with a handshake, the smell of sandalwood, and the intoxicating promise of $1 billion partnership. It started, as most great betrayals do, with a handshake and the smell of overly expensive cologne. I remember the scent vividly. Sandalwood mixed with something metallic, like a successful merger or maybe just sheer, arrogant confidence. He was standing in the middle of my tiny, cluttered office, leaning over my worn mahogany desk, and his eyes, those sharp, calculating blue eyes, were fixed not on me, but on the stack of notebooks between us. I was buzzing, honestly. I was high on caffeine and the pure, untainted joy of creation. My idea, the core engine of what was about to become NovaFlow, wasn't some fleeting concept scribbled on a napkin during a late-night beer. It was the solution. It was the elegant, almost ridiculously simple way to solve the problem of data latency in consumer-facing smart devices. Every company in the market was patching the cracks, adding band-aids, but my system, the adaptive predictive routing algorithm, was the cure. It made things feel fast, not just faster. It made them feel intuitive. I'd spent 3 years wrestling with that algorithm. 3 years of late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee, of failed prototypes that looked like modernist garbage, of the quiet despair that whispers, maybe it's just a good idea, not a revolutionary one. When he walked in, he didn't ask, he assessed. He absorbed the scribbled diagrams, the flowcharts, the dense mathematical notations like a connoisseur sampling a fine wine. He didn't even pretend to be impressed. He looked mildly satisfied, as if he'd known it was coming. "This is brilliant," he said, finally. His voice was smooth, oiled, the kind of voice that sells multi-million-dollar software licenses while simultaneously sounding like a comforting grandfather. "The efficiency gains alone. You've cracked the latency ceiling." I felt a flush rise up my neck, a heady mix of pride and vulnerability. "It's just the baseline, really. The predictive layer is where the real magic is. It anticipates the need before the user even fully forms it." He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to weigh the significance of my words. "Exactly. The anticipation. That's the hook. You should be charging a fortune for this." That was the hook, right there. The validation. The promise of everything. He didn't just compliment the work. He instantly framed it within the context of his empire. He was Marcus Thorne, founder and CEO of OmniTech Solutions, a conglomerate whose logo was synonymous with sleek, reliable, overpriced tech. The next few weeks were a dizzying blur of meetings, investor pitches, and tailored suits that made my own faded flannel shirt look like peasant wear. He brought in his team, sharp, polished, slightly condescending people who treated my enthusiasm like a charming, yet ultimately naive eccentricity. They started calling it the Thorne Adaptive Engine. I watched, helpless, as the conceptual blueprint I had nurtured died in the sterile, high-rise air of his executive suite, only to be reanimated by his corporate muscle and polished to a blinding sheen. They changed the color palette. They reskinned the interfaces. They slapped the OmniTech logo onto the hardware. But underneath it all, humming perfectly, was my code. My elegant, beautiful, fiercely protected algorithm. The escalation wasn't sudden. It was a slow, creeping suffocation. First, he promised me a VP role, which felt like a consolation prize rather than a partnership. Then, he offered me a substantial salary, a number that made my jaw ache in disbelief. It was enough to buy me a small house, maybe a decent car, a life where I didn't have to worry about the intellect looking at me with pity. But the true betrayal came 6 months in. NovaFlow had launched. It wasn't just launched, it exploded. Reviews called it magical, unbelievable, and the reason my entire workflow finally feels like it's in the future. The stock price jumped 3 points in a single afternoon. I was sitting in a meeting, presenting the Q2 metrics, charts that were, frankly, breathtaking, when Thorne cut me off. "Look, Amelia," he said, his tone shifting from charming man towards a stern patriarch. "The market has spoken, and the market speaks in terms of ownership. You are invaluable, yes, but the IP belongs to OmniTech. You are the chief architect, but I am the visionary who scaled it, the innovator who brought it to the world." His silence in the room was thick, heavy with the weight of his smug certainty. "I created the core logic, Marcus. I managed." My voice, surprisingly steady despite the internal tremor. He smiled that infuriating, practiced smile. "Of course you did. You're the mechanic, Amelia. We are the ending, and the engine is mine." That was it. That was the final, polished lie, the recognition that I was not a co-founder, not a partner, not even a principal contributor in his view. I was a highly paid, exceptionally clever hired hand. He had taken the soul of the product and rebranded it as his own glistening ego. For weeks after that meeting, I moved through the company in a fog of simmering, incandescent rage. Every time a press release mentioned the Thorne adaptive engine, every time I saw a stock ticker climb, every time a customer testimonial praised its seamless functionality, it felt like a tiny, deliberate jab to my chest. He hadn't just stolen the idea, he had stolen the feeling of accomplishment. He had stolen the quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing that I made this work. The resentment curdled into something harder, something sharp and crystalline. It wasn't just about the money anymore, though the lost equity was staggering. It was about the narrative. He wanted the world to believe that Marcus Thorne, the titan of industry, had pulled this off alone. He wanted them to believe the genius was his, that the struggle, the sleepless nights, the sheer intellectual grit belonged solely to him. The decision didn't arrive as a sudden flash of lightning. It crept up on me, like the tide coming in, inevitable and overwhelming. It became a quiet, focused obsession. I stopped attending the obligatory social events. I stopped smiling when he called my name. My answers became concise, precise, lacking any of the buoyant enthusiasm that used to define me. I began to work in secret, on a private server, running parallel simulations on my personal rig. The goal wasn't to build a competing product. Not immediately. That would be petty. That would be a direct challenge, and he would crush it with his legal department and his billions in resources. No, the goal was smarter. The goal was systemic. The goal was to undermine the very foundation of his kingdom. The foundation was the code. The genius wasn't just the algorithm. It was the entire interlocking architecture built around that algorithm, the user interfaces, the cloud integration layer, the predictive feedback loops, the entire operational skeleton of NovaFlow. It was a beautiful, complex machine, and he had built it on my patent. I started with the most critical module, the adaptive routing core itself. I took the original, pristine source code, the version I had written before Thorne's engineers had added their clumsy, corporate optimizations. I cleaned it up, stripped out the proprietary OmniTech identifiers, and wrapped it in a clean, universally recognizable package. Then came the execution. The night it happened, the city felt different. The usual hum of the city's digital life felt charged, expectant. I was sitting at my desk, the monitors bathing my face in a cool, blue glow, the cursor blinking patiently over the final commit command. My heart wasn't racing in panic or triumph yet. It was beating with a steady, deep rhythm of finality. I had uploaded the entire repository to a newly created public GitHub account. I didn't title it NovaFlow Redux. That was too small. I titled it NovaFlow, the true engine open source. The description was brief, almost clinically factual. The complete, clean room source code for the adaptive predictive routing algorithm that powers NovaFlow. All modules, libraries, and integration points included. Licensed under MIT. No strings attached. Take it, use it, improve it, make it better than Thorne could ever imagine. I hit enter. The confirmation screen was stark. The upload was complete. The initial wave of reaction was slow. A few bots, a couple of tech journalists who were already suspicious of OmniTech's monolithic grip. And then, suddenly, the deluge. Notifications started popping up like digital fireworks. GitHub alerted me to 50+ immediate stars. Then, it jumped to 300. Then, overnight, the sheer velocity of attention became terrifyingly beautiful. People didn't just download it, they started dissecting it. Engineers from Silicon Valley, from Shenzhen, from tiny startups in rural Europe, they all poured over my code. They found the elegance in the structure that OmniTech's rushed integration had obscured. They started suggesting improvements, pushing pull requests that were genuinely superior to the versions Thorne was currently running. The next morning, the headlines were screaming, "Open source revolution. Amelia's code shatters OmniTech's monopoly. The secret behind NovaFlow exposed. Code revealed. Future uncertain." Is Marcus Thorne's empire built on free labor? The great open source leak, the rage, the simmering, cold burn, finally found a release valve. It wasn't a shout. It was a deep, satisfying exhale. Marcus Thorne called me first thing at 7:00 a.m. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual velvet coating. "Amelia, what in God's name did you do?" I was walking to the coffee machine, pouring the dark, bitter brew that tasted like righteous indignation. I didn't look up immediately. I gave it back, Marcus, I said simply. Gave it back? You just detonated the IP portfolio. Our entire Q3 projections relied on proprietary lock-in. Who is going to trust the product when they know the engine is free? His voice rose, laced with panic. They trust the performance, Marcus. And the performance is incredible. But they are tired of being told that the magic happens inside a black box owned by a man in a tailored suit. He started pacing in the background of the call, the sound of his expensive leather shoes squeaking on marble. This is sabotage. This is intellectual terrorism. You have cost us millions. Amelia, think of the licensing revenue, the corporate partnership fees. You thought the revenue was the point, I interrupted, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the coffee. You thought the exclusivity was the point. You didn't want to partner, Marcus. You wanted a trophy. A beautiful, functioning, proprietary trophy that proved you were the visionary. Then came the final, exquisite piece of the trap. The devastating pivot. You wanted the world to know you were the genius behind NovaFlow, didn't you? You wanted the credit, the pedestal, the spotlight. I finally looked up, meeting the implied force of his gaze across the phone line. Well, Marcus, the code is free. And guess what? The community has already started building the next iteration. They're calling it NovaFlow 2.0, and they've already improved the predictive accuracy by 3% using optimizations you wouldn't bother with until next fiscal year. There was a beat of stunned silence, a silence so profound it felt like the entire market had stopped breathing. But that's not the final blow, is it? Thorne whispered, his voice dropping back to that dangerously smooth register, but now threaded with pure, unadulterated fury. I smiled, a genuine, unrestrained smile that felt like cracking a dam. The final blow is this. Because the source code is open, everyone can build on it. Everyone can fork it. Everyone can take that magnificent, beautiful engine and plug it into their products. The monopoly is gone. The ownership is decentralized. I paused, letting the weight of that settle. And here's the cherry on top, Marcus. Because you insisted on being the singular visionary, the one who deserved the glory of the original build, the one you claimed as yours. I let the word hang in the air, sharp and clean. It is now public domain. You don't own it. You merely licensed it. And the community, Marcus? The community is taking the license, they are celebrating the theft, and they are already writing the patents for the next 10 improvements. You are no longer the engine. You are just the original, slightly dusty chassis. And frankly, I concluded, the rage finally settling into a deep, satisfied warmth, you look better in the rearview mirror.